Wallace E Cunningham is undoubtedly a genius, a master artist and architect. He is without question a true giant, who has created spiritually and emotionally astounding homes that rank amongst the finest in the world. I believe he travels in a creative realm that only a few can ever enter, more intuitive than intellectual, designed with spirit and emotion, says the New York Times architectural critic Joseph Giovannini. Cunningham says, "I don't build houses, I build pieces of art, and people live in them. What the views will be and how the light will come is almost all you need to know for a building. It's almost like having a camera and planning a shot. I take objects and fundamentals as I know them, and abstract them into art. I take people's lifestyles, views, and light and turn them into art constructions." In 2003, he received a design award from the International Academy of Architecture, and in 2009, was named an honorary professor. He was named in the top 100 designers by the prestigious Architectural Digest. Although Cunningham studied at the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture, he felt out of place, chafing at the hierarchies that kept him working on what he considered insignificant projects. He left early, and since then has resisted practicing under the authority of any ism. Instead, using the Dewey method, the sometime student basically enrolled in each house by making it, acting then as his own tutor and critic. The self-trained architect augmented his observations from the field with observations drawn from the arts. "My approach to design is more intuitive than intellectual," he says. "The process is begun by seizing one catalyst, which can simply be a distinctive feature of the site, or be as complex as a special desire of the client. The response to this catalyst is triggered by instinct, and the design is realized by collaborating with spirit and motion. I try to tap into the psyche with unexpected manipulations of form and light, which are intended to be as sculptural as they are architectural," he says. And none of his work exemplifies this philosophy more than at Seabluff, his latest opus. Seabluff is situated at the intersection of art, technology, and nature. It stands as a testament to Cunningham's intuitive design capabilities and unwavering commitment to exploring the boundaries of architectural potential. At the heart of Wallace E Cunningham's philosophy lies the seamless integration of man-made structures with the surrounding natural environment. Seabluff exemplifies this principle with breathtaking elegance. Nestled atop a picturesque bluff, overlooking the horizon, the residence appears as a natural extension of the landscape, as if nature herself had carved it into existence. His thoughtful placement of large glass panels allows the interior spaces to embrace the ever-changing play of light, showcasing nature's splendor like a living work of art. Cunningham's architectural style is often described as a captivating dance between geometric precision and poetic expression. Seabluff manifests this duality through its clean lines and fluid forms. The juxtaposition of angular planes and graceful curves creates a sense of rhythm that resonates throughout the structure. In the pursuit of continuous refinement, Wallace E Cunningham masterfully employs minimalism to elevate Seabluff into an exemplar of architectural purity. Stripping away the superfluous, he accentuates the essence of design, allowing the structure's form and function to harmoniously coalesce. The result is an environment that fosters tranquility and mindfulness, a sanctuary where the mind can roam freely and the soul has a place to enter. In Seabluff, Cunningham has once again demonstrated his prowess as a visionary architect, transcending the conventional and pushing the boundaries of luxury residential design. His intuitive approach, rooted in harmonizing with nature, exploring geometric poetry, embracing minimalism, and harnessing the interplay of light and shadow, has yielded a masterpiece that captivates the intellect and nourishes the soul. Beyond the aesthetic and technical marvels, Seabluff embodies a deeper philosophical message, the idea of architecture as a conduit for a dialogue between man, nature, and the divine. The residence's seamless integration with its surroundings not only provides breathtaking panoramic views, but also fosters a spiritual connection with the land and sea. Cunningham's philosophical musings transcend the mere physicality of the structure, inviting occupants to reflect on their place within the vast universe of art, nature, and humanity. Cunningham's Razor House is so unique that it has been the stage for commercials and a TV series. The plot, located on the edge of a cliff, presented many difficulties. The site had been already abandoned by several owners and architects. A large amount of infrastructure work was required by the site due to all the different levels. The main house is conceived as a glazed bridge that is occupied. Cunningham wanted the house to step down the slope so that each roof formed a terrace to the adjacent upper floor, recreating the outdoor space that the house itself displaced. Cunningham describes it as a multi-level cliff dwelling. In most of his houses, he pursues the strategy of an uncentered building, dispersed to the perimeter of a site, redefined as an occupied field. At Razor Bluff, the field became three-dimensional, extending several stories below the original surface. He has used the volumes to create solids and voids that spatialize the house three-dimensionally, and the circling and angling geometries dynamize the space. Whereas modernists often expose supporting systems as a building theme, Cunningham subordinates structure and mechanics to the overriding poetic idea. He expresses motion as a point of departure, so highlighting notions of support would be counterproductive because they emphasize fixity rather than flow and flight. The buildings do not focus on their own instrumentality as their subject, as in many high-tech buildings. Cunningham subordinates technique to effect. A pragmatist by choice and necessity, the self-trained architect augmented his observations from the field with observations drawn from the arts. He shows that architecture can represent a practical, real-world application of art. His vocation as an artist-architect takes priority over his status as a professional. Architecture for Cunningham is not an art, but art. Though not everyone is as blessed as Alicia Keys to live in a $30 million home. So what can we learn from Cunningham that can be applied to more affordable spaces? City House presented an unusual challenge as it was located on an urban block, on a small plot of land, had no topographical features or view and little direct sun exposure. In other words, a typical urban street location. The primary problem was that the site is blinkered by tall houses, which created the difficulty of how to bring daylight into the interior, and how to expand its sense of space. Rather than centering the house on a lot, creating front and back facades facing the street and a back garden, Cunningham brought the garden to the center of the house, so that the building enclosed the garden in an elongated C-shaped fashion. The garden was the object centered on the lot, and its centering effectively dispersed the house to the perimeter of the site. Decentering the house and breaking its objecthood provides us with a seminal insight into how buildings can be designed for restricted spaces. Light is introduced as a celestic clock, and shifts depending on the time of day and year. As the sun changes angles, the light appears as thin as laser beams, then broadening as the day progresses. Light connects the building to the physical movement of the earth. Unable to reach beyond the limited boundaries, Cunningham reaches up instead, creating vertical slices of space that rise 2 and 3 stories. I borrowed ceiling spaces, he notes. The ceiling, for example, has 3 heights, and all the spaces overlap vertically or horizontally, borrowing space visually from one another. Rather than follow Mies van der Rohe by constructing a house out of simple planes, Cunningham subverts the orthogonal and its importance by privileging the invisible diagonal. Mies grid space, while Cunningham's stepped panels and stepped sections make space slip, giving it spatial dynamic and even thrust. For Cunningham, the secret to bringing out the light as a phenomenon is to hide the source and force someone to look at a small amount, One sunbeam is much more powerful than the vastness of light in the desert, he states, adding, I like shafts of light that open and close. For an autodidact who seems to remain perpetually open to self-instruction, the most important lesson he culled from City House is that light is the element that both binds a house and moves it, the house as a sundial. The house with light patterns are like living objects, they are kinetic. The pieces don't move, but the effects of the movement are recorded on them. Of all Cunningham's work, undoubtedly the finest is his masterpiece, called Harmony. The opposite of a constrained urban plot, Harmony was a sprawling site with stunning landscape views that required framing. Here the architect organized rooms and calibrated view corridors with strings to understand how the house would frame the landscape for which the owners had bought the property for. Like a 19th century landscape artist, Cunningham composed views, using beams, columns, and the volume of rooms as bracketing devices. But more than pursuing a picturesque tradition in architecture, Cunningham was implementing a design attitude that implies architecture understood as experience, rather than as concept. The openness of the house absorbed the views integrally, making them environmental rather than more distantly pictorial. The clients occupy the view because of the heightened sensuous awareness provoked by the house. Channeling long views as it edited the foreground, the house emerged as an optical instrument. The large crescent-shaped swimming pool at the front of the house forms part of the editing process. The trellises, long beams set on the thin edge, continue inside where they are sometimes stacked 2 or 3 levels high. The slots between the beams are glazed, so that what seems like a lattice open to the sky functions as a roof. Similarly, the walls are broken into stepped piers, the gaps between them also glazed. The result is a porous fabric of beams and piers weaving over and under each other. It's like a great spider web of lacework expanded across the site. Cunningham says, open up a structure to sky, landscape, and view, and the building becomes alive. Create in confined space and your soul will have a place to go. As at City House, the structure, though orthogonal, is not static but sets up dynamic circulation patterns. The piers step diagonally across the site, creating diagonal vectors leading through the house. As at City House, sunlight and moonlight penetrate the slotted openings, creating gyroscopic patterns of turning light. The house is not the solid, the shadows are, and otherwise the house dissolves into luminosity. Just how the grid plays itself out and projects light is not predictable, but separating and layering the parts allowed me to produce an intangible and ethereal space that always defers to the view, he says. Rather than designing volumes sculptured by the sun, as Le Corbusier advocated, Cunningham weaves a structural web of beams and columns that filters the sun. While Le Corbusier was influenced by the solid volume of masonry architecture of the Mediterranean, Cunningham was interested instead in the grape arbors that sheltered people from the sun. He designed Harmony to allow the building to reveal light as a phenomenon, and not the light to feature the building. He was more interested in sunbeams than in concrete beams. A house with so much interior space would normally suffer from gloomy interiors, but the trellis allows balanced daylighting throughout the interiors, rather than intense natural light at the perimeter, which rapidly falls off inside. Here the shadows stretch across the whole interior. He says it's like standing under a tree with large leaves. You get these beautiful sunbeams moving through the building, not just light from the sides. It's a spatial apparatus that acts as a time machine light filter. Open up a structure to the undulating space of sky, landscape, and view, and the building becomes an ever-evolving organism. In his emphasis on light, with a building orientated to the sky, Cunningham virtually overlooks the earth, and therefore distances himself again from his Taliesin roots. As in City House, he is stretching beyond his formative influences towards other elemental paradigms. Though he is working as a romantic, shaping picturesque compositions. Cunningham is also constructing, like an impressionist, a three-dimensional architectural painting out of the effects of light. The architect is pursuing difficult aesthetic goals by using the elements themselves, light, space, sky, and water, to define the essential qualities of the house. Here we see the unique genius of Cunningham, who never repeats himself on a project. At the back of Harmony, Cunningham places a lone, freestanding column that has no purpose other than its own existence. With the column, Cunningham is exhibiting architecture in absolute terms, as only itself, pure form without function. The column supports nothing. The single column he uses represents the independence of architecture as a field. The shape of the column is like a tool that helps create something beautiful, rather than being the main focus. It's like a piano that allows the music to be played. However, he begins by focusing on the instrument itself, the column, and its ability to stand out and be unique. You're never left wondering if Cunningham is a genius. Harmony is a seasoned, seminal work in an artistically ambitious career that was shifting focus from the material to the immaterial. When first viewing the Wing House, you could be forgiven for thinking that it is a recent building, possibly created within the last few years. But in fact, it's the first architectural design of Wallace E Cunningham that dates back almost unbelievably to 1978. His concept for the house, which grew out of the landscape, channeled what he sensed were its forces. The curvilinear movement of the land encouraged curvilinear movement of the house. He used the curves to express motion. In one of his most important statements, Cunningham says, "There is a graceful inevitability to a complex design that in no way should seem forced." If only more architects could adopt this philosophy. He responded to the contoured sites with curvilinear geometries that gave the impression of being more gestural rather than controlled. As spinning and spiraling forms, they generated energy. The forms are more lyrical than Euclidean. The designer broke the box, eschewing contained, static space in favor of open geometry and form. He says, "People use the 90-degree angle as a turbo crutch. I think the right angle was pushed to standardize things. It's fairly unnatural." What he had exhibited in his first project was a predilection for complexity. Two circles spinning out in opposite directions from their common overlap. At Wing House, he started to cultivate an architecture that could not be understood at first glance. He did not build motion into the geometry, simply for the sake of motion, form for form's sake, but instead to physicalize the house. The house may be beautiful, but it also engages the senses and triggers an emotional response. "I do one-of-a-kind sculptures for people to live in," says Cunningham. "Buildings are not just visual. I want buildings that you can walk up to and feel something you've never felt before. Buildings need to radiate feelings and emotions," he says, adding, "They're not just visual. I always try to achieve an unseen quality beyond physical appearance." It can be seen that what Cunningham really seeks is what's called aura. His response to each site varies widely. Without an articulated philosophy, Cunningham brings few assumptions to a project and does not repeat himself. At brushstroke, the architect brings the driveway up to the elevated structure on a ramp, whose retaining walls are gestural. Cunningham's formal virtuosity is most keenly evident in the extraordinary pool, whose surfaces are flush with the front terraces. He takes the pool out of the ground and isolates it from any perimeter walls and uses the space between the pool and exterior walls as a passage. He brings visitors in from the front gate between the side of the pool, surfaced in black glass mosaic, and the high stuccoed perimeter wall, so that they walk past the length of the pool, whose waters brim over the knife-like edges of the infinity rim, to ripple down the black wall. After the compression within this carefully choreographed sequence of space and materials, guests arrive in the open, on the plinth at the front of the house. Cunningham has controlled the entry sequence so that it becomes a promenade that delivers the surprise of an isolated, very serene world. The temple front is mirrored by a black-bottomed pool, whose rimless edge creates an aurea plane of watery blackness. The sinus curves of the pool's sides play off one another as they taper to their tip. In the late afternoon, they, and their shadows, also play off the curved front walls. Cunningham multiplies edges so that the curves of the pool and the walls conspire to form a virtual drawing in space, in which all the lines evolve and resolve around each other, in a relational three-dimensional tableau. He maintains the flowing lines of curved walls, playing off curves. At brushstroke, Cunningham's design elevates the pool to the level of environmental art. He delights in the ability of water, the first mirror, he says, to alter the physics of the building, making it appear to hover in reflection. Until it's presented in a way that you're not used to, until you've made it strange, or original, or unexpected, people won't notice it. Its topological and formal resemblance to a temple is not really the reason for the aura of brushstroke. There is, instead, a subtext of ephemeral effects that plays on the building. With the high walls, Cunningham has edited out the visual distractions of the neighborhood, establishing a cloistered calm. He cleanses the visual palette and evokes calm as a stage necessary to wonder. Cunningham had long observed the difference between a building that is worldly and one that is religious. The nature of environmental mysticism is difficult to explain and even more difficult to design. You're looking for the shadow, for the reflection, for the appearance that will make the physical world meditational, elucidates Cunningham. It's something for your soul that's elevating and exhilarating, a serenity and wholeness. You're looking for feelings that are beyond the material facts, the phenomena that make the physical world special. Spirituality and emotion are integral to my work, he says, adding, nature is not static, nor should be the efforts of man. Dealing with spaces as solids in a design causes the building to become extremely confined, static, and without spirit, mystifying space in a spatial spirituality. Without the religion, and your soul has a place to enter. Mysticism occurs whenever a human being sees the separation between the natural and the supernatural, between worldly and eternal, as overcome. With the Ray House, rather than assuming a one-story box design, the architect exploded the box from the interior of the lot, with a courtyard that pushed the rooms to the perimeter of the site. He dismisses architecture that, in its clarity, is too knowable. I always strive not just for the physical aspects of a design, but for this unseen quality. Is it going to make you feel something? It's not just churches that can deliver a religious experience, he says. Cunningham creates sense baths, highly immersive environments aimed at sensuous rather than ideated pleasures. The powder rooms seem like chapels, with light coming from above, and solid stone wash basins carved and detailed with the care and gravity of sacramental fonts. I don't think that just the church should offer a spatial experience that touches the soul, he says. In order to invoke a higher spiritual awareness, religious architecture is designed to calm the conscious mind, in such a way as to cause the unconscious mind to become more predominant. Religious and spiritual vernacular architecture achieves this by invoking spatial geometric designs that are unexpected and just complex enough for the mind's eye to become perplexed. They use spatial designs with curves, angles, and geometric shapes to throw the viewer of their normal thinking, and thus allow the calmer inner mind to open up through spatial architectural inducement. Again, like at the Razor residence, the upper floor at Cunningham's Crescent House presented a superior view, so he inverted floors, placing the more public spaces, living, dining areas, and master bedroom on the third floor. He cultivates anticipation by starting visitors along a circular ramp that submits them to a suspenseful buildup. He slows space by parsing out the entry. The meditative procession acts as a delay into the building. As at brushstroke, the visit unfolds as guests start up the ramp that edges past a crescent-shaped pool. Just after the start of the promenade, their eyes rise to the level of the water pooled in the black-bottomed basin, and when they look out across the water to the horizon, the surface of the water in the pool merges with the surface of the ocean water, in the kind of ethereal experience. Mid-level at the second-floor landing, a disc-shaped concrete terrace fits into the hollow of the crescent pool. The terrace here, bridged overhead by the elevated third floor, frames a view of the yard and a glimpse of the ocean beyond. The ramp leads to a landing on the third floor, where the expansive living spaces front the entire width of the property and offer an obstructed view to the ocean panorama through a long wall of plate glass. Cunningham has choreographed a rich spatial sequence that spins visitors on a dance through highly sculpted volumes. In the living room, he introduces a new angular geometry that creates a spatial diagonal thrust across the living area. The ceiling, which rises as it angles out to the ocean, helps shoot the eye out to infinity. He has used the volumes to create solids and voids that spatialize the house three-dimensionally, and the circling and angling geometries dynamize the space. The architect takes a holistic view of the entire site, giving emphatic value to the third dimension through development of the cross-section. The house is not a passive passageway into the view, but a design that contextualizes the ocean in a spatial dynamic frame. Cunningham has scripted a visual narrative for how to see the ocean. The shadows and shifting coloration of the western light projected by the setting sun, through which he set up the space as a receptacle for phenomena that the environment itself will set into play. A religious quality, haunting, beautiful, and mysterious. Promontory interprets the landscape through architecture. Cunningham produces houses that are themselves works of art. The designs attract collectors who, understandably, wanted to add architecture to their collection. The house was designed for owners who also had an extensive art collection, which they wished to showcase in the house. Cunningham created an abstract world inside Promontory, designing a loft-like gallery environment suitable for contemporary pieces intended for white walls. The masterful stroke in the design of Promontory is the handling of light. The public spaces that include the living and dining rooms are deep. Cunningham evened the natural light throughout the space by bringing clerestory windows and skylights across the roof. He transformed what would otherwise be windows puncturing the roof by masking the skylights with undulating ceiling forms that float below the ceiling line, hiding the windows themselves from most angles, feathering the light, which bounces off white surfaces. I wanted to distribute natural light throughout the house in a soft way, not with strong, stark, directional light, he says. Every time a wall breaks, the ceiling breaks and the clerestory windows are introduced. The floating ceilings touch neither the walls nor the ceilings. Cunningham again has edged architecture beyond design and into art. Great architecture is a reveal, and at Earth, Fire, and Water, Cunningham tunnels the visitor into mystery. Wallace Cunningham starts his promenade architecture within the building. Cunningham here starts his promenade with the approach into the property. The guests first drive through a line of pepper trees, through a tunnel of lacy green, and arrive at a circular motor court bound by high walls. He then invented a ceremony of entry, enchanting the visitor into forgetting the fact that the entry was blinded to the landscape and panoramas that constitutes the raison d'etre of the entire development. The arrival courtyard, with the walls surrounding it, masks everything about the location. "You're in a cylinder," he says. A visitor sees only two gaps in the cylinder, and steps forward into either. You come forward and then see a set of stairs that angles over and cascades down into the earth, to a landing that is isolated by 2 reflection pools on either side of the door. And so the entry precession and compression is complete. Cunningham slows space by parsing out the entry. The meditative precession acts as a delay into the building. The pool merges with the surfaces in a kind of ethereal experience. At the Abrers, the architect created a matrix of indoor and outdoor spaces that pattern the site in an expanded grid. The house is highly porous, and its flexible nature takes on a character determined by the use. For example, the courtyard becoming living and dining rooms during outdoor soirees, as the furnished areas take on supporting background roles. Here he has carried over his insights from City House to another flat site limited in acreage. The indoor-outdoor plan, with pocket gardens adjacent to the wings, creates chiaroscuro patterns of light that recall those at City House, but on a larger scale. Light here comes not in striations, but in blocks filling the courtyard. High creative resistance to rules yielded an unexpected, highly livable new organization for the house. Cunningham espouses nature rather than the machine, because the machine is repetitive in its essence, and therefore standardizing, and as Schindler said, dehumanizing. All angles to Cunningham are valid, as are curvilinear forms, whether derived from the compass or avian imagery. He always opens form. He often lifts the roof off its walls, dissociating their respective geometries by the height of a clerestory. Rarely does he close a design symmetrical plan or authoritarian axis. The geometries usually resist the closure of a regular solid. Cunningham does not use geometry as a tool of control, but of release and affinity to a larger environment. He says, "It's unfortunate when a building is a stage set, and things are padded, to give the appearance of stability and permanence. The interior is hollow." He prefers to spend his attention and budget on bringing natural effects into his structures, rather than lavishing expensive materials on the surfaces. He prefers plays of immateriality to displays of materiality. His houses display a consistent emotional depth and complexity. Spaces of wonder require special insight and the expertise of a virtuoso artisan. Cunningham has mastered the craft of materializing the immaterial